Yo, welcome to Sig Slayers, the comic interview show, period. I'm Mike the Sig Slayer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? This man has the magic touch, man. Everything that he's worked on has been legendary. Let him know what's up, Mike.
Joining us today, we have comic book legend Mike DeCarlo with us. But before we chat with Mike, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right. Our next guest, his work can be seen in Batman, Detective Comics, Booster Gold, Legion of Superheroes, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Omega Men. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you the one and only Mike DeCarlo. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well, and thank you for having me, and I hope we have a good time.
Oh, we're going to have a blast, man. And it's going to start right now. We're going to just dive right on in. So, Mike, since it's your first time joining us, we like to get our guests comic book origin story. In other words, how did you get your first gig in pro comics?
All right. In the spring of 1979, yes, ancient history, Dick Giordano, who I think most of you know who that is, was running an art school in Stratford, Connecticut, which was only about 15 minutes from where I lived. I was 22 years old at the time, and I'm not exactly sure if I read it in the paper or how, but it was a 6 or 8 week program, and it was relatively inexpensive, and there was about 30 of us in the class. And so I joined. It was like in April of '79, and it was Dick giving us all of his knowledge, giving us daily assignments, weekly assignments, and they were not easy. He pushed. And what he was trying to do was ferret out those who took it seriously and those who didn't. And somewhere in the middle weeks of the class, what he said was, my intention here is to find the best of all of you and make him my personal assistant. So everybody in the class was, ooh, that was big incentive, because that guy had been, I think, Inker of the Year like 6 or 7 years. I mean, and managing editor, Dick Giordano was very legendary by that time. So me being not quite all that cocky, I said, well, there's like 28 or 29 really talented people here. What are my odds? But I didn't think about it. And finally, there was one last assignment we had, which was tell an apocalyptic story in just one page. A sequential apocalyptic story in one page. And I gave it a lot of thought. I put a lot of effort into it, and I turned it in. And Dick started reviewing it. Now, I'm going to talk about the result in a third person because by nature, I tend to be a little humble. I think I try to be. That's how I was raised. But Dick Giordano held up my piece and said, in all the years I've been teaching, this is the best one I've ever seen. So I'm floored. And right after the class, he said, you're my new assistant. So I was on cloud nine as a 22-year-old guy, a legendary artist, a big time artist. I'm going to be his assistant. So that was the break of my life. And Dick will always have a special place in my heart for what he did for me. And for the next year and a half, until the very end of 1980, as we were going into 1981, and for the next year and a half, he taught me everything that you needed to know to enter into the business. Not just drawing, but how to conduct yourself as an artist and as someone who would be an asset to any comic company. So he taught me business, responsibility, attitude, and art. And I believe in January of '81, I met with Joe Orlando, who was the art director at DC. And he immediately offered me from my samples. He said they had loads of pencilers, and what they needed was some really good, reliable inkers. And Joe offered me, he said, how many pages can you ink a month? That's what he literally said to me. So there again, there's my still 22-year-old or 23-year-old brain saying, wow. So I said, I don't know, I think I could do 2 books a month, which was 40 pages. And that's how I got started. I think my first assignment was like in March, a month or two later, A Brave and the Bold. Then I think I got a regular gig on Green Lantern, and then Warlord, if you remember Mike Grell's Warlord.
Absolutely.
And then years on Legion of Superheroes. Then I was offered Batman in late '85. And that's the one that turned my career around, because I ended up becoming part of the Death in the Family thing, which to this day, has given me a fairly decent place in the history of comics.
We're gonna talk about that, Mike. We're gonna talk about that, but I want to stay with Dick Giordano real quick because you talked about like 3 questions in like the last 2 or 3 sentences, so I want to move on to that in a little bit. But Dick Giordano, we've interviewed a few disciples of the late great Dick Giordano, and I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit more about his impact on comics, because obviously he had a great career, as an inker and stuff. But from your point of view, especially someone who has personally hired you, what do you think is his impact on comics?
Well, Dick was known as pretty much an inker, but Dick was very talented, even as a colorist and certainly pencil, because there wasn't the differentiation between pencil and inker when these guys started in the 50s. You either were an artist or you're not. And people like Dick just found they could make more money inking, as a lot of people ended up feeling. But he was very talented, and I learned so much about drawing, because inking is just a matter of learning how to control your tool and getting facile with it. But Dick always told me, an inker is only as good as how well he draws. And that's what he always taught me. Learn how to draw, learn to draw, and the inking will just look good simply because you know how to draw and you know what you're doing with it. And I know people like Scott Hanna and people like that. Well, I'm friends with him. We're the same way. Drawing is the essential part of inking, because anybody can learn to control a brush or control a pen or a crow quill or but it's what's going up on here, what you're doing with that brush. But anyway, Dick has influenced Bob Layton, Terry Austin, you can go on and on and on, Joe Rubenstein, the list of people that Dick has influenced, and they all say the same thing. Dick was like an uncle to you, and he could tell you 100 things that you did wrong, but you never felt bad because he knew how to talk to you. It wasn't like, you screwed up. It was like, all right, I see what you did, but think about it more, and why not try thinking about it and doing it this way? And you ended up doing it because he said it in just the right way to not offend you and to motivate you. And that's the legacy of Dick Giordano, the ultimate teacher and the ultimate knowing how to speak to other people. And that's what I would say about anybody who didn't know Dick. He always felt like you were with a friend. John Romita Sr. was like that too. He's just, when you were with him, it was like, immediately they were your friends. No matter what you said, you felt comfortable. So I don't know if I just went off on a tangent.
No, that was a beautiful, beautiful answer.
Mike, I want to ask about the role of an ink artist, and why are they so specific to comics, the comic creation process, and the aspect of time.
All right, well, I'll ask you a question, not to offend your intelligence, but when you open up a comic book, are you saying what the penciler did, or are you saying what the inker did?
You're
seeing what the inker did, yeah, because everything is inked, yeah, exactly.
So when you can have a great penciler, and if the inker doesn't know what he's doing, he'll ruin it.
Yeah.
And if you have a competent penciler and you have a really good inker, he can elevate the quality of that penciler, strengthen the penciler's weaknesses, and strengthen his strengths. So that's what an inker brings. He gets into the mind of the penciler, and by using his own artistic abilities, puts down on paper what looks best in print. Mm-hmm. He's working in tangent with the penciler to make the best printable and colored product for people to look at. And I'm sure you all know enough about comics and have read enough comics to know you might have a favorite penciler or two, but you know the difference when that penciler is inked by somebody not that good and somebody you really like. What a difference it makes. And that's what an inker brings to the table. Sometimes it's not appreciated the way it should be. I know with the mid to late 90s, you started getting editors who just didn't get it. And they thought you were there to trace a pencil. And that's when I started losing interest in comics by the late 90s, because they wouldn't let me do my job. I wasn't there to trace like a rapidograph or a monkey every single little line the penciler does, because why not just find a way to print the pencils and just leave the inker out of it? That's the way I felt. So anyway.
Well, Mike, you just read my mind, man. You're a fantastic guest, because I have this ongoing theory, and correct me if I'm wrong. I have this ongoing theory that there was this paradigm shift around the late to the mid 90s in inking, where the pencils got tighter, there was less room for interpretation, and you're kind of saying that it kind of went more toward, dare I say, tracing versus your own artistic influence within the production process.
Yeah, Stanley used to have a word called embellishing. He didn't call them inking, he called them embellishing. And I carefully say this because I don't want to indict anybody in particular. It was just an overall feeling in comics. As comics went from the story and the property was the important thing. Superman and what was happening in the story was important. And if you had a good penciler and inker, yeah, that was really important too. But in the early to mid 90s and onwards, it became who the penciler was. And nobody cared anymore about anything else. Yeah, the writer they cared about, the Chris Claremonts and on, but who's the penciler? And God help an inker who changed anything. And again, not to indict anybody, but pencilers began having incredibly large egos to the point where they would ask the editor to only use certain inkers who they knew would completely religiously trace what they did. And that's when I knew my types, the Rubensteins, all those types were going to get phased out, because that's not what we did. That's not what we were trained to do. You can get anybody who knows how to control the tool to trace a pencil, but that's not what inking is.
Like, I want to ask you about working a lot with another legend, Jim Aparo. Can you explain the dynamic of how you guys worked in tandem so well together?
Well, I think it's going to go in coordination to what I've been talking about. Jim was a guy who understood the process, and because he often inked his own pencils, up until me, really, very few people inked Jim before me. He inked himself. Jim knew what an inker's role was because he used to ink his own stuff. So he did not pencil so tightly that, you had to, oh my God, what if I don't do that exact, it wasn't that kind of thing. I did my thing because he trusted me, and he did his thing, and he wasn't supremely tight with it because he knew that me, Mike DeCarlo, was going to interpret his reasonably tight pencils in a way that he was happy with. So we always were like this together. And Jim once said to me, and again, I say this as a third person, he said, Mike, if I can't ink my own stuff, you're the person I've been most happy with finishing my pencils. And that was a huge compliment from a guy I always greatly respected. And I think the comic industry respected quite a bit. So we worked fabulously together.
You guys were like Magic and Kareem, man. That's cool. Okay, so Mike, you worked possibly on the most classic era of Batman. The 80s, to me, the most pivotal, long-lasting things happened in Batman that still sticks today. You helped kill off a Robin. You helped a Robin become Nightwing, and you helped usher in a new Robin with Tim Drake. He wore his first unofficial Robin costume in The Lonely Place of Dying. What does it mean to be a part of so many pivotal Batman stories?
Well, I think back that there were so many ways comics in my career could have gone. And sometimes the confluence of things hits you just right. And sometimes in life it hits you just wrongly too. But that was just a perfect thing for me to happen because I loved Marvel and DC, but the DC character, like most, always was Batman. So when I was offered Batman in late 1985 or very early 86, I jumped on it because Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman, they're the flagships of DC. So to be on Batman, I just love the dark nature of it and the fact that he wasn't superpowered. So, and Batman, I think for about 3 years, was the largest selling comic in America. Sold more than the X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman was selling 450,000 copies for years, a month. I mean, if nowadays, if a comic sells 40,000 copies a month, that's considered good. Batman was selling 10 times that regularly. And so, yeah, I am proud personally to have been part of that. And, when I'm at shows, which I'm at often, people come up to me, this book changed my life. I started loving comics because of the run in the late 80s. You see the joy in their eye that once they were 9 or 10 or 11 reading this book and you were part of it, and it means so much to them. And it's very humbling to have hundreds of people come up to you and tell you how much that run meant to them. And I'm often at shows with Jim Starlin. We're pretty good friends. And I always say, Jim, thank you for writing that story because it changed my life for the better. So anyway.
And we interviewed Jim a few months back, and he says the same thing, that this story, Death in the Family, was life-changing as well, which is a perfect segue because that, speaking of pivotal storylines, Death in the Family was probably the most pivotal of that run. Had a 900 number where fans could call and decide the fate of Jason Todd, which was Robin at the time. So I wanted to know, because I actually saw the alternate ending. I was at the DC headquarters. I was able to see the alternate ending. I want to know what that workflow was like. Did you guys need to have both of the outcomes ahead of time, like for the same deadline? And then who kept the alternate ending, the artwork?
Well, before I answer that, have you seen the reprinted in the last year, the cover Robin Lives? Batman's holding him, Robin Lives.
Yes, sir.
Do you know who drew that? That wasn't
that wasn't Jim Aparo?
That was me.
Oh, that was you.
Yeah, I penciled and inked that, and DC didn't credit me for it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So you did the alternate ending?
I did the cover that is
the cover for the alternate ending. Okay.
Yeah, where Batman's holding Robin is saying he's alive. That's my artwork.
Oh, wow.
Jim had nothing to do with But that's all right. People say, "Oh, why don't you sue DC or whatever?" Please, don't worry about it. But whoever's listening, that cover, that's my artwork.
Oh, we're definitely going to clip that. We're definitely clipping that.
So you asked me about the hotline and everything, and
the hotline, and then the workflow, because there was alternate ending, because there was a alternate where he's holding him and saying Robin lives, right? So I guess everyone assumed that they just made a cover out of that.
No. Anyway, what we did 3 extra pages. He finds Robin, he's alive. He figures out what he's going to do with Robin, and then you see him taking him away in a truck, a panel truck, to get him medical assistance. And that's the only 3 extra pages we did. And then if it had been through the phone calls, if the majority had been to let Jason Todd live, we would have, done more. But no, I think it was like 8,500 to 8,000 that he should die. So we didn't have to do anything else.
And what did you want during the time? What were you leaning toward? Because you were on Batman well after that too.
Yeah, no, I was in Batman for 5 years.
Exactly.
Yeah, 3 years before and 2 more years after that. I think they could have let him live and just be. I think he could have just been so damaged that he could live, but he would have been compromised, and he couldn't have been, Batman's sidekick anymore. But you can't argue with the results. And then you get Red Hood out of it. So DC knows more about making money than I do, obviously.
Played out well. Another pivotal story that you worked on, Crisis on Infinite Earths. You worked on issue 3 and 4. I know you worked with George Perez prior to that. What was it like? What was it like being part of that inking team of such a monumental project?
Well, I got to tell you, and I say this, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Had I been more dedicated to that kind of mind-boggling detail that George put in, I could have done more. I found it daunting, debilitating with how much George put in on a page. And honestly, because people weren't thinking of royalties back then, but I was losing my shirt whenever I inked George Perez. Because where I might ink 2 or 3 pages of somebody else, sometimes you could get a half a page of George Perez artwork done. Now, the guy was a gifted maniac, if I may use that. I mean, he fit all that stuff in and could still do a page or 2 a day. To this day, I don't know how he did it. But when he got to Crisis, I did what I could. And then I politely told DC, I can't do this. I can't support my family, making $55 a day, because rates were much lower then, inking George Perez stuff, or I can maybe make $200 a day inking somebody else. So yeah, had I been single, or had I had a lot more money in the bank, I would have had the option to do more of George. I just couldn't afford to do it. To be blunt, yeah, it had to come down to finances with George. It was beautiful, mind-boggling. You can't understand what it's like to be given pages in the mail or whatever in the office, and you look and you say, wow, how am I going to ink this and make any money inking this? Sometimes there would be one big panel. You would just do a panel in a day, make $25 that day because you were doing one panel with an entire city scene and 37 characters in it. You can't run through it. You can't do it sloppily, because that's not fair to George. It's not fair to the fans. So you had to be as precise as he was. And you just, I unless you've inked George Perez in his time, it's hard to explain. But I don't know how Ordway and people like that just did it month after month, but they did.
Man, like I appreciate your honesty, Mike, because for the longest time, I felt that the inker's job was the most nerve-wracking. And like you just kind of epitomized what I've always kind of felt to a certain degree about the inker's role, because you have to usher in, you have to finish the job, right? While maintaining the integrity of someone else's work. And then you just talked about, George Perez is one of my favorite artists of all time, and
mine too.
We lovingly call him Panos Perez. Like that's what we used to call him back in the day, because like he would do these very detailed and imaginative layouts, and I often wondered what was, how did the people that had to ink that stuff, how did they perceive it? And you were the first person that like Kevin Real was like, man, I would love to do this, but I realistically can't. It's so much work.
No, I was married with a young child. And like I said, my inking rate back then was maybe in 1985 or something, 84, was maybe $95 or $100 a page, which wasn't bad for then. But I'm telling you, there were days where I would make $40 a day because I'm inking George Perez. And my wife and I talked about it, and I said, geez, this is an important book, and it's prestigious. And she said, yeah, but you can't make $250 a week. We can't live on that. So I ended up politely passing it on. I said, I'd love to do it, but I just can't. I can't continue to do it.
And one more thing before you hop in, Mark, that I just wanted to touch upon, because like even the context of the question that we asked, that Mark asked about, about the inking team, like we're assuming that because of all the detail of the work that DC kind of planned to have an inking team around him, knowing that it couldn't be just one person doing all 12 issues. So you just pretty much proved to us that no, they thought that was possible, because like just reading that book to me would be impossible for one person to ink that, and for everything to be on schedule, because you would have to assume that whoever inks it can do it at the same rate, at the same pace as George draws it. And that to me is like, that's asking somebody to like, do like an extreme athletic feat. It's almost like an athletic event at that point.
I always tell people that what Jack Kirby was to the 1960s, George Perez was to the 1980s. There's nobody like George Perez. Are there people who can draw as well? Yes. But there's nobody I know who can provide so much volume with so much infinite detail. He was a savant, because one of those pages where I could only ink half of it, he would do a page and a half of that in pencils. So, and he's starting with a blank page. I mean, there was something going on. Well, that's why he's world famous. That's why he's a legend. There's Jack Kirby, and then there's George Perez in my book.
Man, enough said. Woo, I love that.
Anyway, I'm going to take 1 second. Speaking of the inking process, this is a commission I'm doing. It's only still mostly in pencil, but I want to hold it up. It's somebody wanted Batman and Robin, so you can see him right in the middle of doing that for somebody. Anyway. So those are my pencils and inks. None of the blacks are filled in, and it's still a lot in pencil, but that's what I mean where Dick Giordano said, learn how to draw and you'll be a really good inker. So anyway, I had to sneak in that this is what I do too.
Mike, I also wanted to ask about the original launch of the series Booster Gold with Dan Jurgens. What was your experience getting Booster Gold started? What was your first impressions?
I thought that Dan had a great concept. And I think it was years ahead of his time, because we see now what athletes and celebrities, their place in society. And he was the first one to say, let me make a superhero who wants to make money on the fact that he's a superhero. So in 1986, I guess it came out maybe, he was probably 15 or 20 years ahead of his time, because he saw this is where society's heading. You know, not everybody's utterly noble and selfless like Superman. Here's a guy, yeah, I'm good looking, I got superpowers. Damn, I'm going to advertise myself and make some money off it. I think it was brilliant. Hey, I'm going to conduct my own interview for a second. I'm going to go on to Lobo, which I was part of.
Okay, yeah, we're going to go. Okay, go ahead.
Omega Men 3.
Yeah.
And I tell people this. I started with Omega Men with Keith, issue 1. And shortly after, we were friends. He calls me on the phone and says, you know, I got this idea for like this intergalactic bounty hunter. Except the problem is I want to make him so powerful and so violent and so lacking in anything good that I don't know if DC's going to go along with it. He said he's going to be so violent and it's going to be so graphic. This is late 1982. It's a long time ago. So we talked and talked. I don't want to say I had anything really to do with Lobo, but we did talk back and forth. I gave my feelings, and I told him, because he was hesitant, I said, look, present it to DC. What can they do? Turn you down? So maybe I helped talk him into it a little bit. I'm not looking to get any royalties on Lobo. I'm not saying it was 99.9% Keith, which it was. But we did talk about it before he even started sketching it. And then issue 3 comes, and there he is flicking brains out of people's heads and everything else. So now that they're going to make a movie, I wish poor Keith was still around to see that his idea was coming to Hollywood fruition. But yeah, I tell people that story, and they're like, "Wow, you were talking to him about it?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah." You know, you're around long enough, and you have these stories to tell people. You know,
well, that's what I'm talking about. Everything that you touch it turns into gold. You have the Midas touch. So I also wanted to talk about your work on Bongo Comics. You won an Eisner for that work. Can you tell us about that transition from superhero comics to comedy comics?
Yeah, I had told you that I saw the handwriting on the wall in the mid-90s. I did spend some good time with Valiant. They were more understanding, Bob Layton and Jim Shooter. They were more understanding of how an inker is important and not just a tracer or pencilers. But even Valiant, I think by 98 or 99, had stopped producing much. So I was getting a lot of work with the DC licensing and property division. So I was keeping income that way. And I was also doing Looney Tunes, Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, all that stuff. And so I had gotten comfortable. I was making similar money doing that kind of work as I did 10 years earlier with comics. And then, you know, my son had brought home a Simpson comic. And I loved The Simpsons. And I looked at it and I said, geez, that'd be fun. I've certainly got enough experience with this stuff. So I actually called, I think late 1999 or early 2000. And I talked to one of the art directors there, Terry, and they, you know, he knew who I was. So they sent me a kit, you know, to audition for it. I passed it. And for 15 years, I did both penciling on Radioactive Man and a few others, and inked maybe 120 issues of The Simpsons. Right. And I've gotten to be good friends with with Bill Morrison, who's like the biggest and most important Simpson designer ever. Yeah. He actually taught Matt Groening how to draw.
What?
Yeah.
He didn't tell us that.
Yeah, no. Bill's very modest, but Matt Groening was nothing as far as the print media. He talked him into forming Bongo Comics.
Yeah.
He talked it into him about how to design all the characters. Bill Morrison is very modest. He's another, all this name dropping. After years of meeting all these people, you become friends with them. But Bill is a great guy and one of the most talented people I've ever met. He's a great painter, a great designer. He's done so much. One of the more talented people I've ever known. And no, he didn't pay me to say that either. But yeah, I mean, Matt Groening, he was doing fine in life, but until he hooked up with Bill Morrison, Bongo Comics and the print media of The Simpsons was never going to go anywhere. Yeah. So anyway, they were a great company to work for. And by around 2015, they were starting to not have the sales anymore. And I don't remember when I won the Eisner in early 2000s or something for our work on the Radioactive Man. But yeah, that was fun. That was me being able to pencil myself. And I had some pretty good people inking me, Mike Royer and Bob Smith. So it was fun to see other people inking my work. So
fantastic.
Anyway.
Mike, you go to quite a few conventions throughout the year. What is your most requested sketch and what is your most signed book?
Usually the Death in the Family run. And last couple years, Omega Men 3.
Yeah.
Constantly. And strangely, that Masters of the Universe where Superman is fighting, I forget what issue is that, but Superman is fighting, who's the guy with the skull? I keep forgetting.
Skeletor.
Skeletor. That is so popular. You can't believe. There's got to be 10 issues that every con I go to where people have that book and want me to sign it.
You signed mine last year, so yeah.
There you go. Case in point. So,
yeah, because that's the first appearance of He-Man in comics. That's why.
There you go. Yeah, now that's a while ago too. What was that, 83 or 4?
Yeah, like 83. Yeah, that's a hot minute ago.
Jeez.
Okay, so like Mike, you have a decorated career. You mentioned a lot. You mentioned Legion of Superheroes, Omega Men. We didn't mention Mighty Thor. You did mention many of your Warner Brothers properties. So we did talk about that: Animaniacs, Powerpuff Girls, Looney Tunes. Is there a project in your career that you're most proud of?
Most proud of? Well, I'll tell you the one, other than Batman, that I most enjoyed doing, and that was Thor, because, you know, in the 60s, Kirby was everything to me. I mean, I started buying comics because of my older brother and reading comics in 1962. Now that's a long goddamn time ago. And I remember buying with my brother Avengers #1.
Oh, wow.
And because my brother said, look, and it says it on the cover, Mike, this is the same guy, same team that does Fantastic Four and the Hulk. I said, whoa, we got to get that. That was in the summer of 63. I'll never forget that. I have such memories. Comics in the 60s were such a part of my life. I can't, you know, you guys must know. You're all comic people. But I mean, I was there the beginning of the X-Men, the beginning of Spider-Man, the beginning of the Avengers. I was there. My first comic I ever bought was Fantastic Four 10. That's late 1962. So Marvel just exploded in front of this young child's eyes. And that's why I knew how to read before I started school, because my brother was bringing home all these books. And it's like, he goes, I'll teach you how to read. So my brother taught me how to read by the time I was barely 5. So I'm reading all these comics. And that's why I know all of Stan Lee's big words as a little kid. But, you know, it's like, if you're a little kid, what better time? Because DC was doing all that marvelous work too in the 60s. What better incipient time in comics was the early to mid 60s. That's where the foundation of everything we know today, we know. So I'm very lucky to have just been born in that little period of time. Because if I was a little older, I would have not appreciated it, or a little younger, I wouldn't appreciate it. That was that little time where you're between 6 and 10 years old, and that was when Marvel just exploded between 62 and 3 and 67 or 8. Marvel just exploded, and I was there, and I thought that's the way comics were always going to be. Oh my God, Galactus, oh my God, Ego, oh my God, Dr. Octopus, oh my God, Magneto. It's just every month, something new. And you just thought that was the way it was going to be forever. Steve Ditko doing issue after issue, Kirby doing issue after issue, Buscema, Ramita, Gil Kane. You just thought, wait, this is the way comics is going to be. But it turned out to be not quite that so. But man, what a time to grow up and read comic books. I tell you, very, very privileged to have lived through that.
Beautiful. Mike, we have one last question. Is there something that we haven't talked about that you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming projects? Any upcoming appearances?
Well, let's see. I happily am in control of everything I draw and do and accept to do now. I am. I don't have the notoriety I might have had when I was working on Thor or Legion or Batman or Crisis. But I don't need that anymore. Now I just take on stuff I like. I'm always in control. Concept, pencil, ink, and color. I do all that myself. And if I don't want to do something, I don't do it. Not that I'm a big shot. I just don't need to do that anymore. And the days of deadlines and stuff, I did that for 35 years. I could never do that again. And I am honored and shocked. And I know it sounds false when I say this, but the fuss people make over me now is just, it's humbling, because the nice things that fans and collectors and people like you say about me, I'm just so grateful. And, you know, if somebody told me when I was 7 years old I'd be doing a podcast and people would actually give a crap, it would have been mind-boggling to me. And I'm about to, in Hershey in a couple of weeks, get a Lifetime Achievement Award for inking. So
congratulations.
Thank you. And, you know, and I'm still healthy and I'm still vital and I still like traveling. And I draw 7 days a week, not because I have to, because I want to. And I don't have any less enthusiasm for drawing now than I did 50 years ago. And that's the blessing of doing something you love, that you never stop loving it. Fantastic. So how's that? Put that on my epitaph. He kept drawing because he loved it. No matter how old he was, he kept drawing. So anyway.
Mike, this has been an honor. Thank you for all your wonderful words from all your legendary collaborators. And thank you for being so humble. You are deserving of all of your accolades that you get. Just know you always have a home here on the Sig Slayers station, Mike. Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Sig Slayers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Mike DeCarlo. We are out. Peace.
Sig Slayers.